Welcome to the future of payroll and workforce management insights by HR.com, your go-to resource for insights into payroll and workforce management. From navigating compliance and technology trends to exploring the latest in global payroll solutions, we're here to keep you ahead of the curve. Join us as we dive into the forces reshaping payroll and share practical strategies to optimize your workforce management. Let's get started. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Future of Payroll and Workforce Management, a podcast here at HR.com, where I am your host, and my name is Brent Skinner, and we're so happy to have you back as viewers of the podcast, and we have a great guest today, and this is Meg Bear, who is CEO and advisor. Thank you, Meg Bear, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk with you and your audience.
Oh, I am excited to have you talk to me and my audience as well. And I said your full name twice there, I just realized, but that's okay. We'll leave it in. So we have a really interesting topic today. And just to give the audience sort of a 50,000 foot view of it, you and I, we were on LinkedIn the other day, and you posted something really interesting about how roles are changing with AI and what we should think about in terms of, thinking about how AI can do the work that humans can. And that's kind of a superficial way of looking at it. And then we had a really interesting conversation later in the green room here for the podcast. We talked about how that might sort of relate to payroll and all of that. So we're going to get into that. But what I like to ask all my guests, and you are a very special guest today, what got you into the world of work? Because you have a storied history in this industry. And I always am fascinated to learn people like you, what got you into this line of work?
Yeah. So first off, thank you for asking me. This is such a interesting arc, I think. So I got into the world of work through the Learning Channel. I worked for Saba for a while in the early 2000s. And if I'm honest, my background before then had already been technology, B2B enterprise, but had been much more aligned with manufacturing, distribution, and financials than anything that was tied to human resources or people. And it was an interesting journey into the learning discipline, because what I was able to really quickly pick up is that from a technology point of view, learning management in that moment looked very much like order management did behind the covers underneath. And so I started to think about how those structures were related. And one of the things that was lovely about coming into the world of work as a business problem, if you will, was that I had a better intuition for what did it feel like for workers and what do workers care about, because we all have done work in our lifetime. And I was able to bring that insight with the technology foundation I'd already built for disciplines I didn't do, which was like shop floor manufacturing and things like that, where I'd spent a lot of time trying to understand what does that job look like and what would you care about in that job. And so coming into the world of work was just a breath of fresh air, because I could care about people. I could think about things that were really important to me, which is, how do we make work better? And I could do that also with an innovation and a product delivery lens. So that was in the early days. Of course, then I came into PeopleSoft, came into Oracle, and the rest is kind of history.
Yeah. I love that story. And, I just want to kind of latch onto a little thread there, helping people or working with people, right? That is a big part of this industry. It's business, but it's the people side of business, which is really, really, honestly, attractive to me as well, having been in this space for about 20 years now. So it's always refreshing to hear folks. I had someone on the podcast at the Payroll Congress a couple of weeks ago. We recorded from the expo floor, and she also said that she started her career out as a as a social worker, and realized that maybe she didn't have what it takes to be a social worker, but she wanted to do, but she liked business. She worked in a bank later. And so she said, okay, what can I do that marries the two? And she went into recruiting for that reason, for that same reason, to help people and also be in business. So I just find that really fascinating. Maybe that's a great segue actually here, because we have AI. Yes, this podcast episode is about AI. Can you believe it? But
How innovative.
yeah, I know, right?
No one else is talking about that.
I know. But we're going to say something new about it today, I think, actually, or something interesting. Hopefully we'll say something to really pique people's interest. So much of what's going on right now is, at least from, at first blush, it seems like everyone's just trying to figure out, okay, what kind of work that humans are doing can we offload onto the AI? And and everybody's just kind of, and it makes sense. It's understandable. I could see myself thinking that too, right? It's kind of a reflex, right? But, what are we doing wrong here? What could we do better? Like, we should be kind of stepping back and thinking. We've talked about this. I'm really interested though to hear your elaboration on this.
Yeah, so this is really an important topic. And again, I think it's totally fine to say, hey, we have new tools and new capabilities. Are there ways we can make what we do today better, easier, cheaper, faster? I think that's fine. I think it's a natural iteration. And I think we do it even in our day-to-day personal lives as well. Are there things that we could improve in our personal lives based on the new capabilities that we can get off the shelf or very easily make for ourselves? Those are all great narratives and relatively useful. The problem is those are starting to work their way to a logical next step, which is, oh, well, maybe we don't need so many people, and therefore we should be laying off workforce and getting rid of different layers of workers and using technology instead. And so if you think about that, that does not feel either very inspiring nor very creative in how we could think about using technology in a way that could make everybody better, or how, as I like to think about it, how we could invent a future that creates more opportunity versus less. And so what I like to encourage people to think about is it's at least more cognitively interesting to me to ask a bigger question. What is my strategy? What is my business strategy? What is my personal strategy? What is it, the bigger picture thing that we could be doing? And then back into, are there different ways we could get to that strategy execution and maybe even expand our vision of the future by looking at the raw materials in the technology in a different way? And so it's much more difficult. It's much more sort of systems thinking and cognitively challenging, but the return is much higher, because if you can get that right, if you can figure out how to make the pie bigger, then you can create not only less arduous and boring jobs, hopefully, but also maybe more jobs. And so this is how I like to think about where the opportunity lies with AI. And this is why I spend a lot of time talking to leaders and to people in the structural part of business, whether that's boards or CEOs or C-suite players, to think about how can you adjust your operating model? How can you adjust your execution expectations to deliver something bigger? Because I think we have an opportunity, and right now it feels very much like the only people that are able to break free of this trap we have of trying to just make things smaller, smaller, smaller is people that are starting with a fresh sheet of paper. And that's great. I do think like new entrants and new startups and all of that, that's great. They should push the envelope. But most people work for companies already. And if those companies are going to just keep getting smaller, that does not create a world that I feel really optimistic about. So I'm eager to help all of us change the conversation a little bit.
Uh, just to parlay off that last part you said. Neither am I. It's just is not very inspiring, and it and you start to wonder how's it even going to work, right? Because sure, you have operational efficiencies that you may, and that's even in question because a lot of the promise of the AI, agentic AI, isn't really coming to bear when it when we talk about newfound efficiencies and this sort of stuff. A lot of companies are hiring people back, right? But let's just go with the hypothesis that, I can bring in agentic AI into my organization and reduce my headcount and increase profits. That might work in the short run, but at what point do we end up with a much smaller consumer pool? Right.
That's
And,
right.
what happens there? And there's somebody wrote a book about that recently, and I cannot remember the name of it. I saw it on LinkedIn this past year. It was something that was floating around in my head for the past couple of years, and I wish I could remember. But I'm going to go on a new search for that. I want to go back though to a couple things here. First of all, and you can feel free to answer either of these however you want, right? So the one piece of it is, and they're kind of unrelated. So one is, what does that look like? What could that look like in practice for an organization? Let's say like a healthy sized, medium sized company, like on the upper end of medium size, right? What does that look like to approach this differently? A and B, what do you think is driving this sort of one-dimensional, knee-jerk kind of one-size-fits-all reaction or response to AI right now?
So I'm going to answer the second question first and then come back to the what does it look like. I think the thing that drives where we are today is that if you really look at kind of how business has grown and maximized for the majority of companies in the last 15, 20 years, um, we have been optimizing against a set of knowns, right? Well, most of the things that we had, yes, we introduced cloud and we're able to build some different types of efficiencies, but most of the ways that business was executed was really about capturing efficiencies against a set of knowns and really optimizing playbooks. So that's the muscle we have been building in the
Mm,
world of zero interest rate policy, in the world of a relatively stable set of conditions, both at the macro as well as within the technology landscape. And so naturally, when that's what you've been trained to do, and most leaders have been growing up through their careers in those last 15 years, that's what you've seen be successful. That's what you were hired to do. That's typically what leaders have been asked to be good at. And so this is kind of the pattern that you understand. And it's really hard to break patterns, especially patterns that have been so successful for you. So I think one of the reasons we get this wrong is that we're trying to apply the skills and the patterns of the past without really have maybe intuited the first principles of why those things worked and when those things might not apply. And
mm,
so I really spend a lot of time helping people think about your job is to break down into first principles, both what it is that you do as a business, what your customer base is yearning for, needing, et cetera, and how you built that strategy and what your operating model was created to deliver. And
mm,
then think about those building blocks being assembled in a different way when you can apply new ways to do things, et cetera. So instead of just trying to make your existing operating model more efficient, you need to think about building a new operating model. And most people just don't have much expertise doing that. And so I think it's the first thing to do is to really incept in most people today, the understanding that there is not just an AI proficiency skill to be built here, but there
mm,
is the building of the proficiency of understanding how strategy should be built and what kinds of operating model levers you have to deliver strategy. And so I think this
mm,
is a place where there's a very large growth area for most leaders today. And that's both uncomfortable at the human level, right? Knowing that you're
mm,
maybe deficient in something you need to be successful. But it's also a real opportunity for differentiation of people that get it right and people that don't. So before I
Yeah.
answer the second question, I'll pause and give you a minute to to
Well,
get in.
well, I mean, you're making a lot of sense. One thing that comes to mind for me listening to you is just how everything is we are very, very, very fixated on generally accepted accounting principles when we think about, what we measure in terms of
Mhm.
value and how to inject the organization with more value. It's all about newfound efficiencies. I actually talked about this at Payroll Congress a couple of weeks ago. I talked about how helping your organizational leadership understand the future value of payroll, right? Because it occurred to me not too long ago that the things that we measure that go into sort of an accounting spreadsheet when we value the company. It's all numbers that we already know. So technically it's in the past. It's happened. Is we know the
Right.
number. We know we are going to have future value, but it's just a variable. It's X, Y, Z. So it's not an actual number we can put into and this is where we get sort of at the outer limits of my understanding of algebra. But it'd be interesting to figure out some sort of way to work variables into, and again, also, I'm not a certified accountant, so maybe there is something out there, but it's certainly not what's driving the decision to just bring agentic AI in to sort of replace what humans are doing. That's again this sort of approach that we're discussing. Um, so those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I think this is a place where when you just try to follow the pattern of the past and then consider how that might play out to the future, you're actually putting a lot of additional risk because we understand very clearly, intuitively even, that the future now no longer looks even like the present. We just don't
Yeah.
quite know what it looks like. So to your point, there's an element of risk in even trying to predict or figure that out both on the upside and the cost side. To get to your second question, though, about like what should people do? This is a moment where I'm really encouraging people to get very specific and very focused on what they try to do with their AI initiatives. And so I'll spend a little time pivoting to your audience and sort of the payroll world. The
Mm.
reason this is important is twofold. You're only going to be able to really think through first principles when you're grounded in a really strong and specific use case. That's number one. And number two, so in building up that expertise that I talked about, you do need some reps, and you also do need an opportunity to go deep with the technology to see if it can do what you think it can do in that context. So I'm really encouraging people away from this kind of like, oh, everybody go figure out what might be optimized for your individual needs with AI. Sure, go ahead and do that, but that's not what the organization should be doing, and that's not what leaders should be doing. Leaders should be picking one or maybe two things that they're going to go after in a big way and asking themselves all the questions underneath that. What kind of expertise do I need to help me figure this out? What kind of tooling do I need to help me figure this out? What kind of outcomes should I be driving towards that are both really aggressive, but also are within the realm of doability? And how do I grow into the person and the organization that's capable of delivering those things? So they should be something you don't know really how to solve for, but you understand there's real opportunity there. And so when I think about like, what would that look like for payroll? I think you really come back to something that we've talked about forever, but becomes so important now. And this is sort of the Steve Goldberg focus on organization agility.
Yeah.
Your job in payroll is to execute the business needs against the people, right? Paying the
Yeah.
people so that they can do the work so that the business can thrive. That is what you do every single day. And so if you understand that is your intentionality and your measurement, and we all understand payroll is somewhat thankless. It's like being in charge of plumbing. If it doesn't work, everybody is really upset. But if it does work, most people take that as a given. But when you recognize that there's going to be a lot of change, then you start asking yourself a slightly different question. Not just can I do the job I have today, but can I position myself, my team, as the group that helps the business deliver what is going to be a lot of volatility? How can I
Mm,
help the business adjust in real time for all of the things that are going to change to go after these big opportunities that AI presents us? And so some of that change is absolutely going to be introducing agents and having agents work with people. But some of that opportunity is going to be about a different set of people, maybe a different location for people. Maybe it's a different business model around people that you're going to have to deliver on. And so understanding today, payroll has some places where things get really expensive, and really looking at that and saying, is that going to become significantly harder for me when the business wants to be more agile in how it deploys its workforce? And
yeah.
that's the question you should start asking yourself.
You're absolutely right. And this is such a great segue into one question I wanted to definitely get to with you. And this is this idea that, when we talk about how to really incorporate AI into our operating models in a more thoughtful way, right? What we are looking at is probably an acceleration of what is today called the gig economy, or this fluidity of roles and people not, and maybe this collapsing of traditional hierarchical role titles and these sorts of things, right? And maybe attendant to that, a sort of a coming apart a little bit of sort of the rigid or the very cadenced payroll cycle, right? So we have people that still
Yeah.
need to be paid. That's probably maybe at some point that'll even go away. Who knows? That's way, way in the future though. But in any event, I'm joking a little bit. But in
Yeah.
any event, right? We have this this rigidity that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just it's an artifact, a persistent artifact from sort of earlier days in payroll, right? And there's more of a need for dynamism, right? Dynamism here with payroll. How can payroll adapt here as the nature of the workforce itself changes, right? How do we fundamentally rethink payroll to kind of to keep pace with that?
Yeah, so a great way to look at the problem differently is to first off get clear about where are the things that are coming your way, right? So I think you nailed it. I think it's timing of how and when you pay. It's mix of workforce between full-time, part-time, and more gig type, whether that's contingent or even just flex staffing within how you deploy people within an organization. I think we're also going to see more dynamism in payment agreements, right? So maybe I get paid a one way for this part of the workday and a different way for another part of the workday, right? So like if you think about that holistically, you can see that you've got a lot of more variability, and that's just within your organization. Now, when you think about what's happening at the, where if you're US, state, local, federal, or where if you're global within different compliance regions and organizations, you start to think about, okay, benefits are looking very different over time. The way that compliance is managed and expected to be managed as the world starts to adapt, as different regions and countries start to put different types of guardrails on the way this is all rolling out, you can see that the problem is getting very dynamic and much bigger, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I think you should really map that out for your own business and say, where are my new constraints going to come in? Because right now, most of the payroll systems that are on the market today, not all, but most, were built in a time where the expectation for change would come maybe in a 3-year, 5-year, 10-year cycle, as opposed to multiple times within a year. And
Yeah.
so ask yourself, where do the constraints become really hard, especially as they elevate cost or agility? Like if there's barriers for you to be able to provide the flexibility that the business is going to need in the future. Those are the
Right.
places to go after, because it's general constraint theory says if you optimize places that aren't a bottleneck, you don't get nearly the benefit as if you optimize against the bottlenecked place. So
Right.
look to the future, ask yourself for your business, where are my new bottlenecks going to come in? And then go the next couple levels deeper and say, how do I position my team and my infrastructure to allow me to move with the business without escalating cost? Because
Right.
again, right now, most of these systems are built that there are specific places where the costs become, as you scale up people typically, and as you scale new jurisdictions, both of those create big hurdles in cost. And so what you really want to think about is, how do you turn those knobs such that they don't require such big cost leaps to adjust to what the business needs?
Yeah. Fascinating. I think you really did a great job of encapsulating that there. And it I think the key takeaway here is that payroll is going to change drastically, as are most other domains of the enterprise, and operations within the enterprise over the next, I'd say, 5 to 10 years, with the proliferation of AI. Any sort of final thoughts you'd like to share with our audience?
Yeah, I think the other thing to think about in the payroll discipline, so, there's just a lot of energy going on in, what happens to systems of records and what systems can or can't be, um, you know, that require deterministic calculation based uh, confidence versus probabilistic, which is where
Right.
LLMs live in the what is the most likely next case. And I think everybody gets their head around the fact that payroll will always be a deterministic system,
Yeah.
because your gross to net calculation should not be
Yeah.
left to the next best guess, right? Which is the infrastructure of an LLM. But that sort of, to me, misses the point a little bit. So I completely agree. You do need a very deterministic foundation for your payroll. And I don't think that payroll will be ripped out tomorrow or vibe coded or any of the other sort of narratives that are going on between systems of records and these
Yeah.
new opportunities. But I worry a little bit that that is also a very reductive way to look at it. So if you think of a job protection or technology protection, yes, payroll lives in a very stable place and is not likely to be removed. But if you live in a world of enabling the business to compete at a different rate, which I hope we all recognize is the opportunity in front of us,
Yeah.
then the conversation we were just having still applies to payroll, because it is, how do you make that infrastructure that is so core to a business's success? How do you make that infrastructure scale to the business problems that are coming your way? You have time to figure this out and to understand how to deploy the infrastructure around your own operating model in that payroll function. But if you just step back and say, oh, I'm safe because this is going to stay stable, I think you're missing an opportunity to really move forward and to help payroll become more strategic to the business than it has been in the past, because people feel like, okay, that's done and dusted. We know how to pay people properly. We do. But we don't necessarily have the ability to add that flexibility for that organizational agility that the business does need in the future. So there's a big opportunity here, and I'm a little concerned that we might be a little too comfortable in the payroll discipline to recognize that this is coming our way.
That's a really good point. And we could talk about this all day long. I know that for a fact. We're about 25-minute long podcast here usually. So, it's been so wonderful speaking with you, Meg. Thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to the Future of Workforce Management and Payroll Insights by HR.com. We hope today's episode brought you valuable insights and fresh perspectives on the future of payroll and workforce management. Be sure to check out more episodes and explore resources at HR.com/podcast or wherever you listen to podcasts. Until next time, keep innovating and making a difference in the world of payroll and workforce management.